All right, class, we're going to finish up chapter 12 this week on social psychology. The first topic we're going to cover is what's called cognitive dissonance. You may have heard this term before. It's used, sort of in, non-psychology circles. But cognitive dissonance is the discomfort arising when one's thoughts and behaviors do not correspond. So cognitive dissonance happens when you have a belief or a value or a thought. That's one thing, but you're acting in a way that goes against that. Right? So when your behaviors don't match your thoughts or your beliefs, then you start to experience cognitive dissonance, right? Which is going to give you, kind of like anxiety, make you not feel so, good about yourself and kind of what's going on. So when you're experiencing cognitive dissonance, there's two things you can do. You can either change your behavior so that it aligns better with your beliefs and your thoughts, or you can change your thoughts or your beliefs to better line up with your behavior, right? That would alleviate the cognitive dissonance. Then your behaviors and your thoughts, feelings, beliefs would be aligned. So change your thoughts or change your behavior. So which one do you think that humans are more likely to do? Do you think they're more likely to change their behavior to more closely align with their beliefs? Or do you think they're more likely to change their beliefs to more closely align with their behavior? So if you've learned anything so far in this class, which I really hope you have since we're almost done, it's that humans hate changing their behavior, right? Behavior change is extremely difficult. So when experiencing cognitive dissonance, most people will not change their behavior to meet their beliefs or thoughts. They'll instead change their thought processes or change their beliefs to more closely match their behavior. So think about if you're maybe a very devout Christian type person who has been taught that having sex before marriage is wrong, and that it's a sin and it's very bad, you're going to go to hell if you have sex before you're married. And so those are your beliefs. But then you get this new boyfriend or girlfriend and, guess what? You start having sex. Well, now you're going to start to experience some cognitive dissonance because you're doing this thing that you're not supposed to be doing, your behavior, but your belief is that you shouldn't be doing that behavior because it's wrong and it's a sin. So your choices are you stop having sex, and so that you can go back to align with your beliefs, or you change your beliefs to more closely align with your behavior. Well, I don't want to change the behavior. I'm enjoying what's happening. So instead, I'm going to start shifting my belief closer to my behavior. So, I might say that, it's really not that big of a sin. I mean, murder is a bigger sin than this. And, did Jesus really say anything about sex before marriage? Because I don't think he did. I'm pretty sure. Let me check my Bible. And I'm just going to keep, justifying and rationalizing the behavior until the behaviors and the beliefs start to line up together. All right. And we tend to do that way more than changing the behavior to go back to our current belief system or thought that we had. Because, we're human and we don't like to change our behaviors. So we're way more likely to change our thoughts to match our behaviors than to change our behaviors to match our thoughts to get rid of cognitive dissonance. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is attribution theory. So an attribution is trying to explain behavior when there is no obvious cause. So when we don't know why someone did something, when we don't know why a behavior happened, we like to try to figure out why, right? So we attribute the behavior to something, right? This is why that person's doing this, right? And we love doing this as humans because we're judgy. So when we're making an attribution, there's two things we can do. We can make a dispositional attribution or we can make a situational attribution. So a dispositional attribution has to do with an internal characteristic of someone, right? They did this behavior, they did this thing because of something about them, right? So usually they're a bad person, right? Oh, they got into this accident because they're a bad driver. They don't pay attention, right? They're so careless. That's why they got into the car accident. Or, so-and-so, broke up with this other person. Oh, well, that's because he's a bad person or she's a bad person, all right? So we're going to make this internal attribution, all right? This dispositional attribution. It's something about you that made the behavior happen. The other thing we can do is make a situational attribution. So this is when we look at the situation for things. All right, it was the situation that caused the behavior. All right, he didn't break up with her because he's a bad person. He broke up with her because he's moving away or because she cheated on him. All right, there was a situational cause for the behavior. They didn't get into the car accident because they were careless. They got into the car accident because their tire had a blowout. All right, it was the situation that caused it to happen. So it's not that you're a good or bad person. It's that in that situation, that thing itself, the situation you were in, is what caused the behavior to happen. And we can make dispositional and situational attributions for good and bad behaviors, right? We see someone donating $100. We might say, oh, they're such a good person to give that money away. That would be a dispositional attribution, right? Or we say, oh, they gave that $100. Maybe it's because, they needed the tax write-off, and it'd be a situational attribution. Either way, which one do you think we're more likely to do as humans? Do you think we're more likely to do a dispositional attribution, you did this because of something about you? Or do you think we're more likely to do a situational attribution, which is you did this because of the situation you were in? As you've probably guessed, we judgy humans are way more likely to make a dispositional attribution and not a situational attribution. And we do this when we're judging others. So when we judge other people, we tend to overestimate the dispositional and underestimate the situational. And we call this the fundamental attribution error, which I might have. Oh, there it is. All right, we overestimate others' internal characteristics and we underestimate the external factors, which is called the fundamental attribution error. That's this kind of big thing that we talk about in social psychology. So with the fundamental attribution error is also another point, which is that while we judge other people, we overestimate the internal and underestimate the external. When we judge our own actions, we do the opposite. So when we are making attributions for why we did a behavior, we tend to overestimate the situational issues and we tend to underestimate our own internal characteristics. All right, think about when, back in the days when we drove around and there was traffic and you were driving down Preston or whatever and someone would cut you off, right? And you'd have to slam on your brakes, maybe you had to, go into the bike lane or whatever. You'd be mad at that person, right? You'd be like, oh, that person sucks. They're a bad driver. Screw that person. You suck, right? That person's a bad person, right? I don't think about the situational reasons for why they cut me off. I think about the fact that you suck. You're a bad person. But if you are driving down Preston and you are like, oh my God, that's my turn, I got to get over, and you pull over into a lane and you cut somebody off, you don't think, oh man, I suck, right? Oh man, I'm an asshole. Oh, I suck. You're like, oh no, it was the situation. I was going to miss my turn. I had to do it, right? It was the situation that made me do it. I'm not a bad driver. I'm not a bad person. The situation I was in caused me to do this. So that is kind of the fundamental attribution error, right? We tend not to think about how the situation people are in can change their behaviors. So an example of this, which is kind of funny and then kind of sad and then kind of funny again, is one of my very good friends, used to be very good friends from graduate school. He has his PhD in social psychology, all right? So he's an expert in social psychology. And he posted on Facebook a couple years ago that he was driving down the 10 freeway in LA and he saw a car accident happen where this guy in this big truck ran into this lady in like a little 4-door car. And they pulled over to the side of the road and he got out also, my friend got out also, and to make sure everybody was okay. And when he got out, the woman who was driving the little car got out of her car and started screaming at the guy in the truck. So it was like this big, F350, hitting this little Toyota Corolla. And she's yelling and screaming at him. And my friend's explaining this on Facebook. And she said, she had 3 little kids in her back seat. And it was just so horrible that she was using such bad language in front of her kids. And, why would she, acting that way in front of your children is not, a good way to model behavior and blah, blah, blah. And he was just going off on how horrible this woman was being when she was screaming at this guy, that had hit her in this big truck. And so I wrote a little comment and I said, well, let's look at the situation here. I'm like, you just said she had 3 little kids in her car and she was just hit by a great big truck. I'm like, that must have been super scary. And she was probably, you know, filled with like mama lion, you know, like, at, you know, wanting to help her, you know, her children, right? It's like a survival instinct. Like, you don't want your kids to be hurt. And this guy could have just very possibly, very easily, you know, killed or super hurt her kids. And so she was pissed, right? And it doesn't mean she's a bad person. It means that in the situation, she was, you know, scared and, you know, frightened, and she had just been through a car accident, right? So she has some trauma going on, and she was, you know, the situation was causing her to act like this. I'm like, and in all honesty, if that had been me, I would have gone crazy and started screaming at that person too. And I am not a, you know, jump to being, you know, crazy emotional person, but in that instance, when your mom, you know, instincts kick in, you kind of do go a little crazy because of the situation. And then I said, and you, having a PhD in social psychology, should realize that, you know, how the situation affects it. And so he unfriended me. So yeah, we're not friends anymore on Facebook. Although I think recently he liked something that I posted on someone else's, so maybe he's coming around and seeing that, you know, I'm smart and he committed the fundamental attribution error. So if I were to give you an example of the fundamental attribution error on, let's say, a final exam, you would be able to say, hey, that's the fundamental attribution error, and what an dispositional attribution is and what a situational attribution is. Alright, so let's talk about prejudice and discrimination. Up next.